What is up, Insaners, and welcome to another video of the Fantasy Premier League 2022-23 season. Now guys, FPL has been releasing player prices over the last few days, so in this one, we'll talk about them, we'll analyze different teams, different players, different prices, we'll talk about which ones have increased, which ones have decreased, and which probably are the players that you might not buy this season. Now guys, if you like what you see today, please hit the like button. You can also subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. There's a lot of FPL content coming up, and I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun. Now there's a lot to cover in today's video, and let's get into it. Now guys, the first team that we're going to talk about today is Bournemouth, is the Championship club Bournemouth, who got promoted last season in the Premier League. And the first look that you probably look at the screen and you see that there are not a lot of options to kind of go for. You have some cheap defenders, but again, they're not as cheap as, let's say, like a 4 million defender, for example. They're all in the 4.5 million price range. So they might not be that great. I mean, there are better options in that 4.5 million price category, which we'll cover later on in the video. You also have the likes of Solanke, who is a forward in the game, who was a top scorer for Bournemouth last season. Now he's priced at 6 million, which is absolutely fine for a promoted team forward player. But I think the fixture not that great. You might not want to go here. You might want to save some money and invest that additional money maybe in midfield, or maybe go heavy at the back as well. So right now, yes, there could be an option as a Solanke as your forward player, but only when the fixtures are kind of really good. And other than that, I think there's Billing as well in midfield, who's also 5.5. So if you're looking for a cheap midfielder, if you're looking for a cheap fifth midfielder in your team, I think he could be an option. But then again, there are some 5.5 million midfield players who might be better, who might have more value. And then again, you might not want to consider Billing at the moment. Though, let's keep our options open. Let's not just say that Bournemouth might not provide some really good FPL options. But at the first look, guys, in terms of the pricing, in terms of the players, there's not a lot to be happy about. Now guys, the second team that we have here is Arsenal, is the mighty Arsenal, who missed on that Champions League 4th spot last season. They finished 5th last season. Now, of course, they will be playing Europa. Of course, there will be a lot of matches. And with a lot of matches, there could come a lot of rotation this season as well. Last season, we kind of saw that Arsenal kind of played, and Arteta in particular, played a decent 11 who we could trust week on week. This season, it might be different, guys. Having said that, we have the likes of Saka, who has been raised in price. Now, he's an 8 million midfielder. He was absolutely fantastic last season, and the value that he provided in that price range was massive, guys. Again, 8 million is also not that much for the kind of returns that he could get this season as well. Now, this season, of course, is a new season. We have new players joining. We have the likes of Gabriel Jesus as well. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they all kind of fit into the system. The preseason will give us an idea in terms of what influence will Saka have on the Arsenal team. Will it be something similar to last season? Will it change this season? I think that could really help us kind of move towards Saka as an FPL pick. But right now, he looks pretty decent. 8 million is a good price. On the other hand, you also have the likes of Martinelli. If you don't want to go very expensive on the likes of Arsenal and Saka in particular, you can go for Martinelli, who's a cheaper option. Now, the only problem that I particularly faced last season, because I had Martinelli for a very long time, but Martinelli could get rotated like last season with the likes of Emil Smith-Rowe. Again, we're not sure that that's going to happen. I think preseason will give us some idea in terms of who's starting where for the Arsenal team. But Martinelli is smartly priced at 6 million. He could be a great option. I would probably not look at the likes of Odegaard as well as Smith-Rowe right now. Maybe even Vieira at the moment. I just want to see how they all fit into the system, because I think the likes of Saka, the likes of maybe even Martinelli could be more attacking, could have better attacking returns. Even Gabriel Jesus, right? We're forgetting that Gabriel Jesus is a part of the Arsenal team now. Of course, his price has not been revealed yet. I'm recording this video before the game went live. So there could be a chance that we might get the Arsenal price, we might get the Jesus price at the time of you watching this particular video. But I think he could also come into play. Now, it'll be interesting whether he's going to play as a number 9, whether he plays on the left or on the right. But I think he could also be an option. Looking at defenders, guys, I think defense is where I'm really interested in a couple of, maybe at least in one Arsenal player. Of course, you have Ramsdale, who is now slightly increased in price than last season. He's a 5 million keeper. This is a very tricky decision to kind of make, because on one side, you can go for somebody who's a 4.5 million goalkeeper starting for their teams. having a decent defense. Then on the other hand, you also have some premium options. So which one do you go for? I think that's going to be really interesting. I think more than Ramsdale, someone who really interests me right now is that battle between Tomiyasu and White, guys. Now, why am I saying this? Both of them are 4.5 million options. They could be decent. White is somebody who, gives a lot of bonus points. The way he plays, his passing, his tackling, his interceptions and all that stuff, I think that really helps him with bonus point potential. Of course, he doesn't have a lot of attacking threat. In fact, he doesn't really have any attacking threat. On the other hand, you have somebody like a Tomiyasu who's probably going to play as a fullback. Again, he's a defensive fullback, so you might not get returns like a James, like a Chilwell. Of course, we're not comparing because the price point is also very different. But there's a conversation to be had here where Tomiyasu probably could be a better option, considering that he'll be bombing forward, he'll be going and attacking in the opposition half. So there is a debate to be had here. Both of them are really good options, and you can definitely select one of them, especially when the Arsenal fixtures are good and they can keep clean sheets. I mean, we saw last season that they could keep clean sheets. Yes, it kind of, got a bit negative. It kind of came down a bit. But having said that, it's still a decent option to consider. Now, you also have the likes of Tierney, for example, who's 5 million. But then again, 5 million, you also have some other options. And you might not want to spend that much, considering that, let's say Tierney doesn't really improve on what he did last season, then I think there are probably better options in even a lesser price range for you guys. Coming to the next team, guys, we have Aston Villa now. Now, Aston Villa has a lot of decent options to go for. We saw last season that the likes of Coutinho, when he absolutely went crazy, I think a lot of us benefited from his returns. I at least for one, definitely had Coutinho for a lot of the important games. Yes, I kind of had him even when he was blanking, so that was a bit, disappointing. But I think he could be a great option. He's priced really well. He's 1 million cheaper than Saka, as we just saw that Saka is 8 million. And he could be great if, Aston Villa do really well from an attacking sense. I think the trio of Coutinho, Ings and Watkins, I think that is something that we kind of have to look towards in terms of who's playing where. Is Coutinho playing as a second striker? Is there a change in structure and formation from Gerrard? And how many minutes is probably Ings gonna get throughout the season, because he's definitely injury prone. He might not start every game, and that is where Watkins is 7.5 million. He's slightly higher than Ings, and that's totally understandable, to be very honest. Now, coming to other options, you have the likes of Cash and Digne, who are 5 million. Yes, you couldn't expect them to be around 4.5. That would have been way too cheaper for these attacking fullbacks. On the other hand, you can't even see these kind of players going around the 6 million price range, because that would have been a bit too much for both of them. Now, on the other hand, you have someone like a Ramsey, who was a very cheap option, who we kind of had, a lot of managers had him last season for those, I think, couple of massive hauls that he got. But other than that, he didn't really perform that great, especially from an FPL perspective. And 5.5 million, again, there could be some options, better options, maybe cheaper options, or in a similar price bracket that you might want to consider instead. Guys, the next team that we have here is Brighton. Now, Brighton also has some decent options. You have Sanchez, who's 4.5 million again. So he's one of the 4.5 million goalkeepers that you can go for. I think there are a few in the game, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Then you also have Cucurella, who might not be a Brighton player by the time you see this video. He might have signed for Manchester City. And a Manchester City, of course, we'll talk about City in a different segment. But at that price, I think he could be great for Man City. I don't think so that he's probably going to stay at Brighton, but if at all he stays at Brighton, I think he could be a great option. You also have somebody like a Lamptey. Now, Lamptey is very interesting because last season we saw shades of what Lamptey can do. The price is very competitive. He's an attacking option. He can even play as an out-of-position winger, and I think that would really enhance the attacking potential. So at 4.5, he's definitely one to look out for. I think preseason is going to be very, very important. His fitness is the main issue because he doesn't really, remain fit for a long time. He's had a lot of injuries early on in his career. And I think it'll be interesting to see what Potter does with him. But yes, he's definitely one to kind of look towards. You also have the likes of Mope, Welbeck, and Undav. I hope I've not massacred that name. But you have these three options as well. Both of them are forward players. Now, Brighton is not really known for their forward options, at least from an FPL perspective. Now, so it'll be interesting to see how these three kind of come into picture. Which one is playing? Which one is probably getting benched more? Are they probably favoring a particular player in the cup game? So I think it'll be interesting spectacle to see. So there might be an option because they're all kind of pretty cheap. Undav, I think if he plays And if he starts at 5.5, I think he could be the better option to go for, because you're saving 1 million over the likes of Moping and Welbeck. I think that money could be really crucial for you to invest elsewhere. Guys, the next team that we have here is Brentford. Now, Brentford clearly had a couple of options, a couple of standout options in terms of FPL. You have Tony, who's 7 million, who may or may not be an option. Again, we'll have to see what happens with Brentford, which are the new signings, what kind of attacking potential can those signings have, or at least help Tony with. I think that'll be really interesting, because one of the options, the likes of Tony, maybe even Buemo, were kind of half decent was because of Eriksen. Now we are pretty much sure that Eriksen's probably moving to Manchester United. So how that transfer or how that kind of shift, affects Brentford, I think that'll be really interesting. But again, Tony could be a decent option. 7 million, he's not a lot of money. He's of course not at all cheap as well. So it's kind of a tricky price point where you have to make a decision in terms of whether to invest that much money in your second striker, or probably invest that additional money in upgrading one of your premium defenders, which could be a very popular strategy. Or even kind of, let's say if you are struggling for, you probably have some money around 6.5 million, this particular price could probably get you to a Saka, maybe to another 8.5 million midfielder. I think that will be really interesting. That'll be a very important decision to kind of move towards. On the other hand, you have some other options from Brentford as well. You have Raya, who's another option, who's a 4.5 million goalkeeper option, who's probably going to give you a bit of a headache in terms of which one to go for. Now, Brentford were decent in terms of defense. They were not really keeping a lot of clean sheets, but they weren't really conceding a lot of goals as well. Yes, Raya also makes a lot of saves, so I think that could be decent. But then again, if they can improve on their defense, if they can, because they have decent defenders, they have somebody like a Janssen, maybe even Pinnock, for example. They have Henry, so there are some options that you can go for. But then again, not from an FPL perspective. Yes, there are 4.5 million options, but then again, you probably would want to go for better 4.5 million options, or just not go for them at all and probably look at the premium defenders instead. Now, another interesting option in midfield is Visa, guys. He's 5.5 million. He's definitely competing with a lot of other 5.5 million options, and it'll be interesting to see how he performs in the preseason. How many minutes is he getting? What is his fitness, as with a lot of players? And Visa is definitely one to look out for. Coming to the next team, guys, we have Chelsea. We have the heavy hitters, Chelsea, who have had a lot of price changes. They've had some players leaving the club. And it looks a bit weird when we see the likes of Chelsea and we don't see a lot of premium options. But that is the case, guys. We have Mount, who is in that 8 million price category, guys. I think that's a pretty good price for a Mason Mount. I think there'll be a lot of value, especially if he plays in that number 10 role, which he did for a lot of the last season, guys. I think he could be a great option. One issue with Mount that we all kind of faced was that, yes, he was consistent in terms of getting you 6-7 points week in, week out, but he won't explode. But that was very different last season, guys. He had those massive hauls. I think this season it could be a similar story. I think he's a really good option. Now, you also have the likes of James and Chilwell, who did well last season. Of course, they had their share of injuries. That is why their price is probably not 6.57 million. I think if they probably would have played the entire season, their price would have definitely been increasing, because their returns were really good. They were playing really well. But guys, both James and Chilwell at 6 million, that is FPL gold in my opinion, guys. I think there is definitely a case to be made for a Chelsea double up. Now, it'll be interesting to see how their defense kind of changes, because they're not having Rudiger, so that's a big void. So what kind of defenders they can sign, whether they can sign any defenders, I think a lot will depend on that. Then you also have the likes of Mendy, who's 5 million. I mean, I couldn't have imagined Mendy to be 5 million in the game, because he probably is the premium keeper playing for a premium defense. You would at least expect him to be around 5.5. But that's what it is, guys. Azpilicueta, again, he might not stay at the club. He's eyeing a move towards Barcelona, so I think he's probably not going to stay. Then you also have the likes of Havertz. You have Silva. Havertz is 8 million, and I think, yes, he played a lot of the games as a forward, as a false 9, as a number 9 as well. And that's why he's classified as a forward in this game. That's pretty interesting, because that gives us a slight dilemma in terms of which forwards to kind of go for, whether you go for a traditional forward in those mid-table teams, or maybe you go for somebody like a Havertz in that 8 million price category. So there is a decision to be made here. Havertz is 8 million. You have Werner as well, who I kind of took last season, got burned by it really, really badly. But then again, he's 8 million. He's probably going to play out of position. So I'm still not sure about how Werner's going to fit. And I think a lot of this conversation would depend in terms of which forward player, which attacking player, which number 9 player that Chelsea can sign. Now, whether they do actually sign a player, that's also very interesting to kind of note. I think we'll probably keep an eye on these players. I think there are some decent options to go for. Definitely a double up in terms of the Chelsea defense. I think that's a great option. And Mendy being at 5 million, guys, I think that is a great way to kind of get into that Chelsea defense. Maybe not spend a lot of money. Maybe double up with a James and a Mendy. Maybe even Chilwell and a Mendy. I think that could also be a particular way to look at the Chelsea team and their FPL prices. Guys, the next team that we have here is Crystal Palace. Now, Crystal Palace again has some decent options. You have the likes of Zaha, who again is priced in the 7 million category. He could be a decent option if he plays out of position, if he plays as a striker. I think there is some potential with Zaha. So when the fixtures kind of get easy, kind of get favorable for a Crystal Palace attacker, I think he could be a great option. You also have Guaita, who's another keeper in the 4.5 million price category, guys. Then again, you also have some options like Tompkins, for example. So if you have decided to dead end your fifth defending position, your fifth defender position, and you don't want to spend a lot of money, you can go for Tompkins, who's a 4 million defender. He may or may not play. We don't know for that. We don't know that for sure right now. But I think he's definitely a great option if you want to save a lot of money, if you want to save some money maybe, and you probably are looking at other options and other upgrades in the other areas of the pitch. Guys, you also have the likes of Edouard and Mateta, who shared a lot of minutes together on the field. They were also kind of, being substituted with the other options. So we still don't know what's going to happen there. But then again, 5.5 million, if we get a nailed Crystal Palace striker, which is probably not Zaha, I think he could be a decent option, because 5.5 million for a forward player is not a lot of money. And if you are able to nail that striker option, I think that could be great. In terms of the defense, guys, we have the likes of Tompkins, Anderson. We also have the likes of Mitchell, who could be decent options there. Yes, they're 4.5 options, but if Crystal Palace can defend like last season, can have defensive numbers like last season, and if Vieira can make that defense even tighter, guys, I think that is a really great value for all those Palace players, for all those defenders, and they're definitely one to keep an eye on. In terms of the midfield, guys, we talked about Zaha, but there's Ulisse as well. I think that also could be an interesting option. He's another 5.5. I think there are a few 5.5 million options now cropping up into the game, and I think he could be a decent bet to go for. Yes, we still have to see how he plays and if he's actually relevant from an FPL point of view, which he absolutely could be, because his underlying stats in whatever games he played last season were quite good for a cheap option. So he's definitely another one to kind of keep an eye on. Now, the next team that we're going to talk about today is Everton, guys. Everton has one of the biggest worries in terms of a huge player leaving them. Richarlison is not a part of the Everton team. He's joined Tottenham. He was a decent FPL option. He was also on penalties. Now it'll be interesting to see whether Dominic Calvert-Lewin takes it or whether it's probably given to somebody else. So we'll probably keep an eye on for that. In terms of the options, guys, Dominic Calvert-Lewin looks a bit expensive at 8 million. I think you might not want to spend that much money on an Everton forward. Then again, if he can reach his overall potential, he can probably replicate his form before a couple of seasons, I think that could be a decent option. But right now, I'm probably not looking at Calvert-Lewin. In terms of the other options, guys, we have Pickford, and again, he could be a decent option, but then Everton really have to improve their form defensively. They have to improve their defensive numbers. They were really bad defensively, guys. They just missed out on getting relegated. So that is probably something that we'll have to look at. Pickford makes a lot of saves still, so he could give you save points, but then again, you would still want that particular keeper, that 4.5 million option, to even give you some clean sheets as well. That could be a bonus, that could be really important if you're not looking at premium options. In terms of the other options, Tarkowski has joined Everton. He could be a decent pick at 4.5. Mykolenko is playing as a fullback generally, so he could be more attacking. It'll be interesting to see how the likes of Dele Alli, Gray, Iwobi, and even Doucouré kind of fit into that Everton system. Preseason should tell us some idea in terms of how they're lining up, and based on that, there could be options. Gordon is another very interesting option, guys, who's 5.5. He's no more a 4.5 or a 5 million option. He's 5.5 million. Now, in the absence of Richarlison, what happens with Gordon? Does he take a lot of those set pieces? Maybe he's on penalties. Maybe he's playing on the left in a more advanced position. Maybe he's probably playing as an attacker. Right now, we don't know what's going to happen there. But then Gordon is also somebody that we probably should keep an eye on. I think there are high chances that he gets a lot more minutes this season. I think he did pretty well in terms of minutes last season, but then I think this could change a lot further in this one. I think he's definitely that I would be interested to kind of know and understand in terms of whether I could go for him, because he's in that 5.5 million price category, guys, which could be very important from an FPL perspective this season. Coming to the next team, guys, we have Fulham. Now, Fulham doesn't have a lot of options, to be very honest. There's Mitrovic, who's a forward in that 6.5 million price category, so he's not very cheap. He's not expensive at all, so he's definitely one to consider. If the fixtures are decent, you might go for him. Traditionally, he's not done that well in the Premier League, so that's something that we probably have to look towards. Other than that, I don't see a lot of options in defense. Maybe even in midfield, I don't think so there are options. But then again, if you want to consider somebody, you can probably consider Wilson, who could be an option. But then he's 6 million, so there's not a lot of value there. You're probably having a lot of good 5.5 million midfield options who would be starters and also who would be a lot more attacking than somebody like a Wilson. I think other than that, we'll probably just keep this very short and sweet. There are not a lot of options, and let's look at the next team. Guys, the next team that we have here is Leeds. Now, Leeds, we don't have the price of Rafinha. Very smartly, FPL has not given us Rafinha's price because he's probably going to leave the Leeds team. Calvin Phillips has already left the team. He was anyways never an FPL, a serious FPL option. But when you look at the likes of Bamford, who's still 7.5 million, guys, similar to what we talked about in terms of DCL and Bamford should have had a higher, a more, or a greater degree of price decrease, but we've not seen that. And now, having not really seen Bamford for majority of last season, we don't know what's going to happen to him. We don't know, in the absence of Rafinha, what's going to happen to Leeds. Yes, they've signed a couple of really decent players, but I think it'll be interesting to see how they kind of all, they kind of fit into the whole system. But at 7.5, I think Bamford is a bit pricey for me. In terms of the other options, we have Melior, who's a goalkeeper, who's in the 4.5 million price category, and I think that could be another option to consider. But then again, when we have the likes of Raya, maybe even Sanchez, who are playing for better defensive teams, because we've seen last season that Leeds were absolutely pathetic in terms of defending. I think they were conceding goals left, right, and center. That probably won't be the case with them this season. We don't know, because under Jesse Marsch, they did kind of tighten up at the back. They still were conceding goals, but slightly became better as compared to what Bielsa was doing. But then I think it'll be interesting to see what happens to them this year, whether their defense improves, whether they're still quite open. And I think the likes of Ryan Sanchez right now is just an early hunch. Right now, they could be better options to go for in that 4.5 million price category. Now, when we look at other options from the Leeds team, guys, among defenders, we have Christensen, who's 5 million. Now, 5 million looks a bit pricey for a Leeds defender. Yes, he might be attacking, he might give you attacking returns, but then again, he probably would have been better if he was priced at 4.5 million. One name that I'm really interested to know more and to kind of look towards is Aronson, guys. He's a midfielder, another midfielder in the 5.5 million price category. I think that could be really interesting to see how he plays in the preseason. I think that he's definitely somebody that I will probably be watching closely, because that 5.5 million price and that midfielder spot could be an option if I want to go heavy at the back. Maybe I want to probably invest a little bit more in attack among forwards, which again might not be a very popular strategy, but yes, that is definitely one way of playing. Other than that, we have the likes of James, Rodrigo, Gelhardt. I mean, all of them are in the 6 to kind of 5.5. Gelhardt is 5.5 million. 5.5 million for Gelhardt also is a bit expensive, so I'm not really interested in a lot of Leeds options. But then again, as and when the season progresses, in terms of how they are playing, whether they're really playing attacking football, whether they're getting a lot of or some decent FPL options that we can consider, that thought process could change. But right now, I think Leeds are probably a no-go for me at the moment. So guys, we've covered 10 teams in terms of the price analysis, in terms of player analysis, in terms of what FPL has released so far. Now, by the time you watch this video, the game might have already been live. But then again, it's difficult to kind of, cover all teams in one video. So I'll probably break down this particular video into part 1 and part 2. Part 2, I'll probably be releasing it tomorrow. Now, there are a lot of important teams in that second part, guys. We have the likes of Man City, Tottenham, Liverpool, Manchester United, and some other decent teams as well. So look out for that video, guys. Make sure that you hit the like button if you liked what you saw today, guys. You can also subscribe to the channel We are growing, we are doing a lot of content. There is a lot of movement in terms of FPL on Instagram as well. So if you've not followed us on Instagram, if you've not checked out our Instagram page, please do that as well. Till then, guys, I hope you've started tinkering with your teams if the game is live by now, and I'll see you in the next one.